Welcome to Biohacking with Brittany, and thank you for joining me today. I'm your host, Brittany Ford, and this is a place where I talk about health and wellness and all things biohacking, cutting edge, technologies, the latest and the greatest in this ever evolving health space. Today's episode was really interesting. We got into all things OCD, which is not something I've actually talked a lot about on the podcast before. We talk about intrusive thoughts, anxiety, generalized anxiety, postpartum OCD, what that looks like, what you can do about it, effective strategies to kind of heal through it, and the different therapies out there that can really help you to manage it if it's something that you are dealing with. I talk about my own personal experience with intrusive thoughts in the postpartum period, and I also talk about the reality of how I've kind of tried to cope with it and what's worked and what hasn't worked. And so it was really helpful actually doing this episode in general. We also talk about ruminating thoughts. Like when you wake up in the middle of the night and you start thinking about your to-do list, like what do you do? How do you cope with those moments? So it was really helpful. I think everyone is going to relate to something in this episode. I think we've all had these moments of anxiety, overthinking, maybe OCD. We talk a lot about differentiating between anxiety and OCD as well. So definitely check this out. Tune in. Mental health is something that I do talk about on the podcast over and over again in different capacities. And I'm happy to see that it's becoming less of a taboo topic. I think that's also really important. So enjoy this episode. And before I dive in, a shout out to Bioptimizers, who are doing their biggest sale of the year right now for November. And they have supplements that actually do support mental health, like magnesium. Their magnesium has 7 different types of magnesium in it. And this is the most holistic, complete magnesium supplement on the market. So I take one of these every single night before I go to sleep. And it's great for stress, pain, muscle pain, sleep, anxiety, and their entire website, their entire catalog is 25% off this month if you use my discount code BiohackingBrittany. So you can get any of their supplements for 25% off if you use my code. So I definitely suggest doing that. They're also adding in free gifts at checkout. Like I said, Bioptimizers, biggest sale of the year. Go now, shop now. I'm placing my order this week as well, actually. I'm getting a bunch of the protein powders, and I strongly suggest ordering, for the next few months or even the next year if you want to, just to be able to save because it's such a great discount off of everything. My discount code is BiohackingBrittany in all capitals. I will link this on my show notes and on my website for you to find easily. And if you have any questions about it, my DMs are always open on Instagram at BiohackingBrittany. Or you can send me an email, info@biohackingbrittany.com. I will get to you at one point. I answer everybody within, 3 to 4 days. I'm obviously on maternity leave, but I'm also working part-time. So trying to manage it all and get to people efficiently. But, at the end of the day, my baby does come first right now. So anyway, enjoy this podcast episode. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will catch you on Friday for another one. Welcome to Biohacking with Brittany. Thank you for joining us today. I am diving into a topic I actually haven't talked about on the podcast yet, which I feel like is getting more rare for me to say, but we are diving into OCD today, something that I have heard a lot about in different spaces. We're going to talk about what it can look like during the perinatal time of your life, postpartum, the difference between OCD and other anxieties, intrusive thoughts, that type of thing. And joining me is Kristina Orlova, who is the host of the OCD Whisperer Podcast. She's somebody who's personally navigated OCD, and she combines her lived experience with evidence-based theories to kind of help break free from the vicious cycle that it can have on people. So we're going to dive into some practical tips and how to manage it and its connection to gut health as well, which I'm super curious about, and sleep and all of these different things. So Kristina, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate being here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you joining me today. So let's start with you. I am so curious about your personal experience with navigating OCD and now that you help other people. Like, how did this journey kind of begin for you?
So I'm one of those folks who did not have kind of the more what you typically would see, like if you look online, that usually with OCD folks say it comes kind of earlier onset or like later teenagers or early adulthood. But for me, it really became prominent in my early 30s. And, before that, I was kind of guessing and wondering. And once I got in this field, I realized so many people have this kind of experience where they're not sure. And so for me, once I realized that that's what I was dealing with, a lot of things fell into place and really made sense in terms of, no wonder I feel, so horrible or anxious or guilty or can't stop kind of this mental looping process. And then I learned later that there's something called compulsive rumination and, starting to really figure out what is OCD. And then with that process, I was looking to join a group practice and I joined a group practice and really just took off from there. And then after that, I started my own practice and the podcast and got deep into the field.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like not enough people kind of talk about it. It feels like, mental health in general, I feel like is really becoming less taboo, but I think there's a lot of discussion on anxiety and depression. And I don't really see people talking about OCD as much. So how do you personally, or even in your business, like how do you differentiate OCD from general anxiety?
That's such a common question. And it's funny because when I hear you say that, because I'm in this niche, like all I hear about my entire algorithm, it's all the OCD accounts and podcasts and stuff. So I always have to kind of remind myself, like, right, for the broader general public, like it's such a small slither of the discussion. But, one of the things when we're dealing with anxiety disorders is understanding how each of them functions. So generalized anxiety, this is interesting because if you really look at like what's the purpose or why somebody does something, you might find that there could be a similar reason. But essentially, generalized anxiety, usually one of the best ways to distinguish it is people excessively worry about real life events. Usually for it to, be meet the criteria for diagnosis, it has to be also at least 3 real life events that have to be present. So like things like worrying about money and job security, worrying about family's health, let's say, and worrying about your relationship. And the excessive worry is not because there's anything going on. There could be obviously things going on, but really you're over worrying in an attempt to try to understand and figure out what's going on and try to make things better. And so you start to have, that's what, hence the name generalized anxiety. You're worrying about so many different topics kind of all at once. OCD, the main characteristic there is what we call intrusive thoughts. And then those are really combined with this feeling that gets generated, which is this intense kind of fight and flight response. It can also be a sense of disgust. And so a person feels really compelled, like this immediate urgency and need to fix it, make it better, make it stop. But the intrusive thoughts that come in are not necessarily tied to a real life event. I've had people I've worked with where really nothing seemingly out of the ordinary has occurred, but then they have this onslaught of really intense intrusive fear thoughts that are just bombarding their brain and they don't know how to make it stop. So, they do the best they can, which is usually when you start to get into those repetitive behaviors, which is what we call compulsions.
Now I feel like I'm starting to like make sense of this and like how we can identify with both of them. So with the compulsions, so that's how it will manifest like physically, I guess, in like your day-to-day life is like you have the intrusive thoughts and then you have the compulsions afterwards. And then you learn to kind of manage both of them. Is that kind of correct?
So what happens is when you have the intrusive thoughts, and here's the thing with intrusions, it could be an intrusive image, something you find completely, unappealing. You don't want it, but it's happening. It's coming in without, you being able to control any of it. Or it could be this intrusive fear thought. It can be an intrusive feeling that suddenly you just feel off for no reason. And so once that first part happens, the obsession, then it's the person goes into a mode of trying to fix it. And so the compulsions can be physical or things you might see, but they also could be internal. And this was a big one for me. I didn't know, like in my own journey, I remember this was like community college before I kind of, went into my graduate studies. And the instructor were doing abnormal psychology. And he was talking at one point, we're talking about schizophrenia and then OCD. And then he gave this example, like, yeah, somebody in this room might be sitting right now and they might be looking up at the ceiling, for example, and they might be tracing the corner until it kind of feels right. And then they go to trace this other corner of the way the rectangle is on the ceiling. And my jaw dropped because that's exactly what I've been doing pretty much the entire class. And I'm like, what? And so I'm like, okay. So he goes, so tracing objects with your eyes is a compulsion, but like you wouldn't know that because you don't typically hear that. What we typically hear are things like checking things over and over. We hear about overly washing things or overly cleaning. Those are kind of the more common things people know, or like lining things up. But there are so many things that a person does when they're attempting to feel better, in essence. And, none of us want to feel shamed. So, most people are going to try to figure out a way to do something to kind of hide it a little bit, right? So that it's not so obvious to others because we don't want to feel judged or shamed. So people start to develop all sorts of internal rituals, whether it's mentally going over and feeling compelled to have to review a situation 100,000 times, even though you can't change it, right? Like something happened, it's done. But we feel compelled to keep reviewing it to try to figure out, what else can I do? How else can I fix it? Or sometimes people count numbers internally, or they might repeat a certain mantra or a prayer. Or in my case, I was doing tracing with my eyes. So that's really kind of the breadth of this, is that there's no shortage of kind of things that a person might do internally or externally to try to essentially circumvent this big feared outcome.
Yeah, that makes sense. I am 4 months postpartum right now, and postpartum has been kind of the first time I have experienced intrusive thoughts enough for me to actually be able to call it that, let's say. So I've probably had them throughout my life, like, randomly, but yeah, I've heard different podcasts about it. So I kind of knew that this might be something that might happen to me and happens to a lot of new moms. And I have been very surprised actually at how they just kind of come out of nowhere. And then I think to myself, why am I thinking that? Do you know what I mean? Like I can recognize the intrusive thought that's in my brain, and then I just try to dismiss it. And it's always about the safety of my baby, always, right? So for example, the biggest one that I deal with is in our house, we have a very open concept, and the second floor, you go up these stairs and then there's a balcony. And so when I walk from my bedroom to the baby's room, I'm walking along this balcony and you could fall over onto the first floor easily. And I always think when I'm holding him, oh my gosh, what would happen if I fell and he fell over the balcony? And that happens all of the time. And then there's other intrusive thoughts, right? Like I'm walking in the kitchen holding a knife and he's in the kitchen with me. And I think, oh my gosh, what if this fell and stabbed him or something, right? And it's just these crazy thoughts that you would never, ever have. And then you have a baby and you're like, wow, I see danger everywhere.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I don't know what your experience is like with postpartum intrusive thoughts like that, but that is definitely something that I deal with.
Absolutely. So first of all, thanks for sharing that, because, it's really common. And this is where we get to now having to distinguish what's actually going on here, right? So we look at, okay, first of all, there's a lot of hormonal changes, right? Makes sense that when hormones shift, it's going to impact mood and anxiety levels, right? Then we have these new responsibilities we're taking care of, right? A newborn. I mean, how could you not worry suddenly, right? Sleep, right? We got to look at sleep. Is your sleep better? Is it worse? Where is it? How is it, right? And how is that impacting, kind of the level of availability and anxiety and worry? And then, of course, there's biological factors. Like if there's family history of OCD or anxiety, right, that can also increase the risk. So what we look at is that, it is really common for new mothers to experience postpartum depression and also, postnatal OCD. Like there can literally be an onset. What we look at is that, within a certain amount of time frame, does some of this resolve on its own as hormonal levels kind of stabilize a bit more and our sleep kind of schedule, because we're in an adjustment period, right? So as you adjust more so, does everything seem to start to resolve a little bit better and more? And for some mothers, it does. But there are a lot of new moms where, especially if we have that kind of family history, where they might have not had a kind of anything really significant before. And then once the baby's here and with all the changes I just said, suddenly there's these intense intrusive thoughts about, baby getting harmed, even though you don't want to, or you don't want any of that to happen. Or like you said, excessive fears about safety. And then suddenly, they can find that they're starting to check a lot more, like repeatedly checking, is the baby breathing? Or maybe sometimes even with the OCD onset, it could be things like avoiding holding the baby because of this fear that I'm going to harm the baby, or like I'm somehow maybe going to hold the baby too tight, or like you said in your example with knives, it would be about falling, but also it would be something like, oh, well, what if I suddenly grab a knife and do something, or what if I accidentally shake the baby, or maybe it's like this compulsive cleaning comes online. You're like, oh my gosh, let me sterilize all the bottles and everything because just in case there's germs and the baby gets sick. So suddenly all this hyper focus goes into obviously the safety and the care of the baby, but it's so extreme. That's one of the things we're looking for, right? It's so extreme that when you're starting to do, in these examples, let's say the check-in behaviors, or you're avoiding, or you're compulsively cleaning, it's actually inadvertently getting in the way of you being able to bond and get close with your baby.
Yeah, I think that's a very good distinction. And I will say for all of, the new moms out there listening, it does get better. Like for me, it has gotten better. I think in the first couple of months, it was more intense. And I think it has kind of calmed down a little bit. And I hope for, the moms listening, maybe that can be the case for them as well. But it definitely hasn't gone away. And I am somebody who has had like anxiety on and off throughout my life. Nothing debilitating and nothing like, I would never say, like I've never taken medication, there's no diagnosis, anything like that. But definitely I'm more prone to anxiety than I am depression. And so then that kind of makes sense when you think of like these intrusive thoughts that are anxious. Like I'm anxious that something's going to happen. I'm anxious that, or nervous that this might fall or that might happen and this safety thing might not kick in. And so I think that's a really good point that you said, like, if you have had experience with anxiety in the past, like you could be more prone to these types of thoughts happening when your circumstances change so much when you have a baby.
Yeah, exactly. And again, that's the thing we're looking for, right? It's because I've had like clients that have come in and said, listen, I didn't, like, I've had some anxiety, but I've never experienced what I'm experiencing now. And this isn't going away. And they would talk about things like, with their doctor that, some like months have passed, like 3-4 months, maybe 5 to 6, and that there's these intense symptoms that just keep persisting. And so at that point is when we when we're doing an assessment, then we might say, hey, like, yeah, it seems like there is this onset of perinatal OCD or postpartum OCD, and not perinatal, excuse me, postnatal and postpartum OCD. And so at that point, we are going to want to treat the OCD component. And again, we have to remember that if symptoms are persisting, there are several things that are happening, right? The brain chemistry, the stress, the sleep deprivation, if you're noticing you're starting to do a lot of repetitive behaviors and they're temporarily making you feel a little better, but then you're noticing, that's one thing to look for, is if you're noticing that you're not able to stop the behaviors, but actually you're increasing in more excessive checking, more cleaning, and that seems to go up, not down. And as you're doing those behaviors, you might notice that you feel worse, not better, and that you're working harder and nothing seems to change to a point where you start to feel like you might crack, because that's kind of a common thing I hear is people feel like, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose my mind. That's the stuff we'll look for, because it really, it's different when it's, more milder or things start to resolve on their own and you can have some things in the background, but more or less you're functioning day to day. Okay. Right. All things considered, you're attending to your responsibilities. You're taking care of the baby. But when you're noticing that all of that is actually not happening and you're not able to really function and things just keep getting worse. And of course, you add in there this fear of judgment any of us as humans have, right? Like we don't want somebody to potentially see this and misunderstand us and be like, what are you doing? Or anything like that. So now you're adding this layer where now moms might feel really kind of embarrassed or ashamed or guilty for not even speaking up or saying anything about it. So, if that does come up, then that's where we really need to look at, okay, let's intervene earlier than later. Because if you intervene earlier, of course, like most things, I would say the sooner you can prevent the symptoms from becoming chronic or, really taking hold, the better impact it'll have on your daily life so that you can actually, really be with your baby and learn how to have a different relationship with this experience if it keeps persisting.
Do you like free stuff? Well, you're in luck because Bioptimizer's Black Friday deal starts now, and they are giving away free gifts with every purchase. That's right. I have an exclusive advance invite to Bioptimizer's Black Friday deal for the entire month of November. This is their best sale of the entire year, guys. If you're feeling stressed out or haven't been sleeping well lately, you are not alone. Story of my life. You might not be able to change all the chaos out there, but you can start supplementing with one key nutrient to improve your sleep quality, as well as over 600 other biochemical reactions in the body. That's wild. Magnesium Breakthrough is the only product I have found that has all the magnesium forms in one convenient bottle. You'll open less bottles, spend less money, and still get the top 7 forms of magnesium for better sleep, manage stress, balance hormones, improve mood, feel refreshed, all in one bottle. When you get all 7 critical forms of magnesium, pretty much every function in your body gets upgraded. Right now, for the entire month of November, Bioptimizers, the makers of Magnesium Breakthrough, are having a Black Friday blowout sale on all of their products. All month long, you get discounts with my unique code plus access to up to $100 in free gifts with purchase. This is the best time to stock up and take advantage of all the free extras you're going to get. Seriously, I would stock up for the entire year. You can get this exclusive deal through my link, especially made for you. You won't find this on Amazon or even on the company website. It's actually only through my link. So you can go to bioptimizers.com/biohackingbrittany and use my discount code biohackingbrittany to get your discount and free gifts today. One last thing you should know, all Bioptimizers supplements are best in class. If for some reason you feel differently, you can get a full refund for up to 1 year after your purchase, no questions asked, which is crazy. So again, guys, if you want to get magnesium, if you want to get their digestive enzymes, probiotic, mushroom breakthrough, all of the products that I love from them, November is easily the best time to do this. This will get you the most percentage off, the best price for the entire year, up to 25% off of everything, every single product. So go now, bioptimizers.com/biohackingbrittany. Use my discount code biohackingbrittany. It's going to be on my website. It's going to be in my show notes. It's going to be super easy for you to find. Enjoy this exclusive deal for November. I love that. I think that's really important to identify and understand. And I want to talk about coping strategies because I think that's so important. Obviously identifying it is key, but what do we do once we've identified it? And for me, when I started noticing it, the worst one, like I said, was walking along upstairs by the balcony. So what I started doing was every time that I would walk from room to room when I was holding my baby, I would out loud just say, I love you to him. And I just tried to rewire the thoughts and make it positive and not oh my gosh, okay, hold super tight. Okay, don't walk close to there. I'm nervous. I'm anxious. Okay, what if I trip and fall? What if I throw him? What if, who knows, right? So I just would always say I love you. I love you. And I would just do that. And it got better. Now, I just made that up and I have no idea if that's actually a coping strategy, but that's just something that I just started doing that kind of helped me in the moment. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on something like that.
Yeah, so that's actually a great example of something that in OCD, if somebody truly has OCD, they would start doing that as a compulsion. It would not make things better. It would become a thing they start to latch onto, like, I need to say that to get that reassurance that I love my baby, I have good intentions, I wouldn't harm you, and I'm going to be okay. So that's the big thing with OCD. And I cannot highlight this enough because this is such a common misunderstanding. People who truly are diagnosed with OCD and have OCD brain, let's just put it that way, because it is a brain, there's a brain kind of issue going on in there, that information is not getting processed accurately. They don't typically respond well to other strategies that would work for somebody who, let's say, has more generalized anxiety or social anxiety or a phobia. They will start to use these common strategies in a really compulsive way where they suddenly will over rely on that behavior, and they will feel like, I can only walk along those stairs if I say that to my baby, to my belly.
Okay.
Right. So they're not going to rewire anything. They're just going to latch onto this thing. And then it's going to start to feel like, I need to say that thing all the time, every time. And if I don't say it, I can't even walk. That's how bad it gets, is that I can't even walk across. So OCD is not like, something I like, or like, oh yeah, I feel this urge to clean, I clean. That's not OCD. OCD is because you're getting this internal, it's interesting because it's an internal experience. You're getting this intense message, that's this alarm signal that's going off in your brain that's basically telling you something bad is going to happen if you don't do something. And so when that alarm bell is going off internally, right, you're going to do anything and everything you can think of to try to make it stop and make yourself feel better and reassured that everything is okay. So in the example you gave, that would be more of a compulsive response. So what we want to do is, if somebody has perinatal or postnatal OCD, is when you work with an OCD specialist, you're really wanting to understand, what are all the different intrusive thoughts? What is it that you compulsively, repetitively do about them? What are the things you are now avoiding as a result? And now let's do something called exposure response prevention. So exposure response prevention, it's an evidence-based therapy. It's an aspect of cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's specifically for OCD. So that's one style of therapy where we want to look at, instead of hiding, avoiding, and pulling away from, let's start to understand how when you avoid and pull away and hide, that actually reinforces the OCD cycle. It actually makes the thoughts be more intense. And your feelings of anxiety will rise. So it's actually doing this thing that's really counterintuitive. So let's actually kind of flip the script, and instead of avoiding or trying to reassure ourselves, let's actually see what it's like if we kind of drop those behaviors and move toward what we actually want. So we want to look at what's important for you. Like, what do you value about being with your baby? Is it the connection? What is it? Is it that, I'm getting a chance to, have this beautiful little creature that I now get to kind of, help raise and bring into the world, right? So I want to connect to the meaning and the importance, like a value, and say, okay, here's why I'm going to now kind of drop this need to repetitively say, I love you, while I'm walking on the edge, and allow myself to feel whatever feelings come up, and do that exercise many times, because now you're truly kind of retraining your brain to recognize that the act of having that intrusive thought and the act of having that uncomfortable feeling are not inherently dangerous. And so you start to truly relearn that, hey, I can still feel this discomfort, and take that step and start to learn and notice that I do have control over my body and what I do, and that I can trust myself more again. And I don't need to, every time when I walk, let's say in that example, say, I love you, I love you, I love you. That's if this was, an OCD kind of example. And if I'm working with somebody, that's one of the ways I would work with them. The other therapy that's out there now for OCD is called inference-based CBT. And that's where we're doing more cognitive work. And we're wanting to understand, well, how did you arrive at this conclusion that you might be somebody who would, drop the baby over or miss where you're stepping and actually put your baby in harm's way? because that didn't come out of nowhere. Where did you get that information? How did you conclude that? So it's a different way to understand how people with OCD arrive at inaccurate inferences, and to help them understand their reasoning process and where it is faulty out the gate, so that they can start to distinguish between, when they're at baseline and people feel good and they're clear-headed, and when is it that when OCD brain turns on, suddenly it sounds like it's rational thinking, but really it's not. And start to see the difference so that you can learn how to dismiss that reasoning process altogether and not even continue down that pathway.
I love that. And I love that you shared both of those different ways of healing and kind of working through it, and also kind of finding the root cause of it as well, I think is super important. And like I said, I'm actually glad you explained the I love you thing, because like I said, you think it's a good idea, but if it becomes a crutch, then now it's just another addictive thing that you're doing in order to kind of get through the day or walk across the balcony or whatever you're saying. And it's such an interesting perspective. And I will say, thankfully, the thoughts have kind of diminished and gone away, not fully, but they're not what they were in the beginning. But I know that's not the case for everybody. And I could only imagine how hard it would be for it to start to control your life. And whether it's postpartum or not, right? Let's even take the baby out of it. Just having these thoughts of, okay, I have to do this in order to do that. Or I'm having these intrusive thoughts every time I back out of the driveway and I might hit another car, or whatever it might be. Besides these couple of therapies that you've shared, what do you think people could do at home, by themselves? Mindfulness, meditation, can that kind of move the needle on this? Or do you think you need something more substantial?
That's such a great question. I mean, honestly, it really depends on the severity of if you're having OCD, connected to childbirth. That's really what it depends on. If it's mild, moderate, or severe, those are kind of the categories to think of. When things are more in the mild form, absolutely, you can kind of self-regulate by doing something like a meditation practice, which is so beneficial, I think, in general, period, for every human. That's just my personal bias. I definitely, when you learn how to kind of just be and be present with whatever is going on internally, whatever the thoughts are or the feelings, which is a big part of mindfulness and meditation practices, you develop a different relationship to that part of yourself so that you can create a little bit of that separation. So I think it's a beautiful skill set that, we talk about it, right? But the truth is, I don't know for you, but I know for me, what I found clinically is, and in general, people talk about this stuff, but do people really implement it the way that, it's suggested to gain the benefits? Not always. But if you really are going to gain the benefits, then yeah, if you can meditate and sit down and just discipline yourself to get in that habit, it's a powerful, powerful tool. It really is. If you have more moderate OCD, you might be able to still do that. But when you start to get to the higher level of moderate and severe, it becomes extremely difficult to do anything because your brain is just on fire and kind of everything is happening to such a level of intensity, like a 10 out of 10, that it's extremely difficult to be able to do something like a meditation or mindfulness. So it really depends on where you are. So if you're at home, things are more mild, where you feel like it's manageable enough, absolutely, then do the meditation practices. I would say also there are self-study programs. So, you can follow, there's so much data now. I mean, even with ChatGPT or podcasts or like your podcast or my podcast, right? Or online Instagram, you can always find places where you can learn more about, okay, how would I do, let's say, how would I give up any avoidance behaviors to re-engage with my baby if I'm feeling this way? So you can do some of that when you're at that level. When you start to get to more moderate and severe, it just gets more difficult to do on your own. And this is just the honest truth. So that's where a lot of times people really need somebody else to help kind of walk them through the experience. But if you're somebody who's even moderate and you just are like, no, I'm going to do this, then yeah, you can at home. One of the easiest things to start to look at is, what am I avoiding? Right? That's the first point of contact. What is it that I'm starting to avoid that I need to re-engage with? And really in many ways kind of evaluate for yourself, okay, what is that thing I'm so scared of what's that bottom line? And let's see if I can move toward that thing. And let's see, can I practice it for 5 minutes? It doesn't have to be anything huge. It can be something really small, 5-10 minutes, and let's just see what happens, almost like an experiment. And then when you do that, you get to see afterwards, okay, did I do okay? Did I make it? Okay, I still maybe had the thoughts or feelings, but was I there? Did I actually do anything? Right? So now you're giving yourself a good feedback loop to learn, oh, look at that. I didn't do anything. Or wow, okay, I actually, like I was super uncomfortable and I didn't like it. You don't have to like it. That's the other thing, right? We get so stuck, I think, these days of I have to feel good. Well, we're human. We're not always going to feel amazing all the time. So if we can allow ourselves some of that grace and open up to the fact that, hey, sometimes it's just not going to be a great day and that's okay, then that's another blessing you get out of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really helpful. And I appreciate you actually saying like sometimes meditation and mindfulness is not enough. Because it's kind of easy to just like slap that on there and say like, oh yeah, meditate for 10 minutes a day and it's going to be gone. But in reality, there's so many people who that just simply is not going to work. And we need to kind of bring in therapies that are just more supportive, or even working with a professional so that you can actually get the support that you need. And I think that's super important that that is an option for people out there. I want to talk about the ruminating thoughts, spiraling type of thing that can kind of happen. So, I've had this happen many times where I wake up in the middle of the night, I go to the bathroom, I come back, and then I just start thinking like, okay, so this is what I need to do tomorrow. And this is my to-do list for the week. And, oh, I'm worried about, my little brother and this is happening with him and blah, 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 whatever it is. And then lo and behold, 2 hours later, you're awake and you're staring at the ceiling in your bed and you've gone down this spiral of thoughts and everything like that. What are your thoughts on that? And for all of those people who experience that, women, men, whatever, what can we do? Like in that moment when it's 2 a.m., we're by ourselves, like what can we do in that moment to kind of like cease that?
Yeah. So first of all, that we would call that rumination or repetitive thinking. And rumination is such an interesting topic because in general, even without OCD, we all ruminate. That's just something we do as humans. It's an interesting characteristic that's got developed over evolution, over time. And so when we're ruminating, one thing is to understand what is the function, what's the purpose of that behavior? What am I really doing with that? And so if you're ruminating, what you're really doing, I would say, is you're trying to problem solve, right? You're trying to figure something out. And so often when we're doing that, number one, I always tell everybody, the first thing that's the most important thing is bring your awareness into the room. Because if you're not actively aware and consciously present to this, then how can we make any change, right? So I always ask kind of like, where are you? Are you here with me or are you somewhere else? Are you in autopilot mode or, right? Because we need to locate where are we. So once you can figure out that, okay, I'm not even here right now, I'm somewhere else. Okay, great. Let's bring you in the room and become consciously present to, okay, what am I doing? So once you realize, okay, I'm actually doing this repetitive process where I'm kind of replaying things in my head or I'm kind of going over it 1,000 different times. And this is my attempt to problem solve, but really I'm not reaching a solution. So I recognize now that this is unproductive. But not only that, when we ruminate, we tend to be very negatively biased. So it's not like we're ruminating, in a positive way, right? Or even neutral. It's always this horrible, negative regrets, fears, hypothetical bad things. So we're extremely negatively biased. So once we can recognize that, and it is extremely mentally exhausting, but the biggest thing is step one is, wait a second, am I actually figuring anything out with this process? So if you recognize, okay, I'm actually not figuring anything out, well, now I can at least label this and understand, okay, this is actually causing me more anxiety. I'm going in a loop. There's nothing new that I've just uncovered, right? There's nothing here that's happened other than my time had just got sucked away from me. So now we get into kind of the next phase, which is, okay, let me become more present and mindful of this thought process. Now let me look at identifying, okay, are there any unhelpful thinking patterns that are going on here? We call those cognitive distortions. So it could be things like, am I catastrophizing? Am I doing all or nothing thinking? Like everything is all bad or it's all good. And of course, when we're ruminating in this way, it's all bad, right? Am I personalizing things? Am I dismissing any of the positives? There's several cognitive distortions that we can be engaging in or unhelpful thinking patterns. So if we can understand suddenly which one of those is happening here and we can identify those, well, now we can get into recognizing, okay, either A, I see now, I'm being really extreme in my thought process. This is obviously not how the world works. It's not like everything is all in this one spectrum or the other. So let me pause for a minute and actually step away from that. So that right there is a strategy where you're able to bring your awareness, follow those steps I just said, and be able to dismiss and turn your attention away from that. And the other thing you could do is you can notice, I'm ruminating right now. I'm doing that thing again. I'm dwelling. So naming and labeling that thought also helps to interrupt the process. So the strategies you're going to want to use are ones that will help you interrupt that process and choose to actively step away from it because it doesn't yield any result, right? Why would you want to keep doing something that yields zero results? So, but in order to do that, of course, you have to first be aware that that's what you're doing, be able to name it so you could see it, and then you make a choice. So I'll pause there because I know there's a lot that I just said.
I think that is really helpful. I think it's a lot. Like, I just think it happens. I think it happens frequently. I think it happens to most of us. I wonder if it's more common in women and men, to be honest. Like, I think about the amount of times that I'm up late at night thinking about things versus my husband. And, it happens sometimes with his work, but it's very rare versus me. I think maybe I'm more prone to it. If we're talking generalized anxiety over my life, sure, maybe that's something I'm more prone to. Yeah, I just think it's tough. And you do all the biohacks and you do all the healthy things and you try to, optimize your sleep. And sometimes it happens and then you're stuck, like I said, like 2 a.m. and you're like, okay, I'm acknowledging that I'm having these thoughts. Let me try and break this cycle. And I think it's difficult, but yeah, I don't know.
Well, you're right. It is. See, this is the thing. And I'm glad you said that because I think the biggest thing people look for, and myself included, before I kind of learned all these things, right? And I always tell if I work with somebody, I'm like, look, the only difference between me and you is I've just been practicing this for longer. That's it. And it still doesn't make it easy. There are times for me, will get caught up and I have to pause and, do the steps to kind of step away from the stuff. So the main thing from what you're discussing is that you're right. You can biohack. You could do all the optimizing, all the things that you're learning to do the best of the best. It doesn't change the internal biological piece of what's going on in your brain. So that's something where for any human, it's taken the time to get better acquainted with our own mind, get better acquainted with what are my patterns? How do I tend to think? How is it that I tend to process information? What do I do with stuff? And so when you can get better acquainted with that part of yourself, then you can start to put this stuff into practice. And then really it just takes practice. It's not, it sounds like it's complex, but in the complexity is more understanding the kind of more the brain, the educational component, the putting it into action. It's the hardest part for all human beings is consistency over time. So it's not the lack of knowledge. It's not the lack of, okay, I understand what's happening. It's that I now need to put this into work, and putting it into work day in, day out. That's really where the magic comes. But that's actually the hardest piece. It's like akin to the gym, right? How many times we'll say, okay, I'm going to start working out, right? And you go, okay, I'll start tomorrow. And then tomorrow comes, oh gosh, I'm tired. How about next week? Right. And so like that right there is a simple example of how difficult it is for us to be consistent and disciplined. And so like, if you just get up and learn, like, look, I'm just going to go regardless, and I might be in a crappy mood, but I'm going to go anyway. That's actually what you're teaching yourself to be able to do, so that whatever state you're in, you're still going to execute. And that is literally the hardest part. So with this piece, the steps I described are not overly complicated, but it's the implementation. And that's where every human gets stuck, and being able to do it consistently over time. But if you can get into doing that, that's where you're going to get the most benefit. And that's something I learned a while back Because I used to think like, oh, let me wait till I'm motivated and then I'll go. Right. And somebody once told me, Kristina, I think you have it backwards. I'm like, what do you mean? And they're like, well, what you need to do is commit to the action and do it. Motivation will come after. I'm like, what? They're like, yeah, do the thing. The motivation will come. I'm like, okay, it sounds weird, but all right. And then I was like, well, let me test it and see what happens. So I did. And I actually did it with the gym example. Oh my gosh, I was not in the mood. I would be so bothered and like, I don't want to, meh, meh, meh. But I just kept doing it. And lo and behold, after 2-3 weeks of going anyway, even though I'm not in the mood or I feel all like I want to argue, or some days I'm just like, But after 2-3 weeks of consistently doing it anyway, regardless, suddenly my motivation came up. And now I'm like, oh, I want to go, or I want to do that exercise, or I want to engage in this process. And same thing here. Before I knew what compulsive rumination was, I didn't realize that was a huge compulsive feature I personally had. And once I learned it and I had to start to put the very things I just said in practice, over time is where I get better. Again, not that it's like 100% of the time, but it's pretty high up there where I can start to catch it a lot faster because I recognize now what it sounds like, what it looks like, and I start to think in a certain way when it's like, oh, I'm looping. Oh, wait a minute. I'm dwelling. Oh, wait a minute. I already covered that question 50,000 times in my head. I'm not even asking anything new here. I'm actually not getting any outcome. I need to stop. Or it might be, wait a minute, I actually already have the solution. I already know what the resolution needs to be. Maybe I don't like it, but I actually know what it is. But because I don't like it, I keep trying to think about it 50 times and I have to remind myself, no, you already have the answer. You just might not like the answer, but you already have the answer. So stop. So it's a way to talk and encourage myself to step away from that really unhelpful process of, repetitively going over and over something in my head, and being able to come back to say, okay, like this is something I actually need to solve. Let me actually truly problem solve this and really identify the solutions and then go and execute them and then come back and look, okay, did it work? Did it not? What needs to happen? Versus this unhelpful, just kind of looping chatter cycle in my brain.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you actually frame it as like problem solving, because that's what it is. That's really what it is. Like when I think about the times that I've been ruminating, it's like I'm circling, trying to think of the solution, trying to think of, or you think of multiple solutions and which one's the best and how is it going to play out? And then you play the what if game, right? Which is tough for anxiety for sure. Like what if is not great for people with anxiety at all.
Well, instead of what if, let's change that question to let's look at what is, right? One small little shift like that, suddenly you're like, oh, okay, right. Like, yeah, let's focus on what is, and then do we need to do something or not? Do we have actual context right now that tells us that something is truly going on that we need to actually resolve? Or do we need to recognize, oh, my brain's just doing that thing again, and let me choose to turn my attention away from it.
Yeah. No, I love that. What is, because that is looking at the present moment. You're looking at the facts in front of you and you're not thinking what might happen. And typically, again, when you think what might happen, it can be very negative, right? So what is almost like more of a positive way as well to think about things.
Yeah. And some of that stuff, like this is what I'm saying, because of the training I have, some of that is inference-based CBT influence kind of a strategy, right? Some of this is going to be more exposure response prevention-based strategy. But regardless, if we are talking about OCD, then it is going to be helpful to learn one of them at least to help yourself work with this part of yourself.
Yeah. And accept that it's okay, right? Like it's okay to have this part of you. It's learning to just be okay with it and live with it and manage it in a healthy way and not let it, kind of take control. If people listening to this are like, okay, this sounds like me or someone I know in some shape or form, where can they work with you and how can they get in touch with you if they're interested in that? And if you have any other resources that you would recommend, that would be awesome.
Oh, thank you so much. That's so sweet. Yeah. If anybody wants to reach out to me directly, I run a private practice for California residents. And if you're outside of California, I offer anxiety coaching. So you can go to Core Results, www.koresults.com. And on my website, you can find all the information and contact me through there. I'm also on Instagram, OCD Whisperer. And of course, that's my show. But more globally, if folks are wanting to look into, it's called International OCD Foundation, IOCDF. And the International OCD Foundation also has annual meetings. And so loved ones and others can attend those. There's going to be an online conference, OCD conference, happening this weekend, actually. Folks can register for that. They can learn more about OCD. Yeah. So that would be the other place, big kind of official place where you'll find a lot of OCD specialists and a lot of more information on there.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I will link all of that in the show notes and on my website as well. This is very enlightening. And I think I learned a lot, and I'm glad we got to cover these topics because in my circles, I don't see it enough. And I want people to feel like there are solutions out there if they are dealing with these intrusive thoughts, OCD, or anything along those lines.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Brittany, for having me and giving me the opportunity to talk about this, because that's exactly it. Most people don't know. And if they know, they don't know what to do. And the biggest thing I could say is that there is actually treatment for this and you can get better.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah, it's very encouraging. Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you. And I will make sure everyone can connect with you super easily.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Biohacking with Brittany. If you're interested in finding the show notes or the sponsors for this episode, you can do so on my website, which is biohackingbrittany.com. Remember to follow me on Instagram, where I'm most active. My handle is @biohackingbrittany. And if you're interested in working together and you want to email me directly, you can do that. My email is info@biohackingbrittany.com. And I look forward to hearing from you and having you tune in next week.